There's a place beneath the world where no light reaches, where the rivers run backward and time loses all meaning, where every soul that has ever lived eventually arrives, and one God rules over all of it with absolute authority. His name is Hades, and here's what almost no one understands about him, what got lost in centuries of Christian reinterpretation and Disney movies and modern fantasy. He wasn't the villain. He wasn't the god of death or evil or punishment. He was the god of the dead, which is something entirely different. He was the shepherd of souls, the keeper of the final peace, the one god in the entire Greek pantheon who never lied, never cheated, never broke his word. He drew the short straw on the cosmic lottery and got stuck ruling the underworld, the one realm that no god wanted, the kingdom of shadows and silence and endless responsibility. And unlike his brothers Zeus and Poseidon, who took their domains and immediately started causing chaos, Hades did something radical. He actually did his job. He ruled justly. He kept the dead where they belonged. He maintained the barrier between life and death that kept reality itself from collapsing. And for all that responsibility, for all that faithful service, he became the most feared, most misunderstood, most unfairly maligned god in all of mythology. This is his story, and it's nothing like what you think. Let's start with the moment that defined everything, the moment that sentenced Hades to eternity and darkness. The war was over. The Titans had fallen. Zeus had claimed victory and stood at the peak of Mount Olympus with his brothers, ready to divide the cosmos between them. There were three major realms to distribute: the sky, the seas, and the underworld. Zeus wanted the sky, obviously. The sky meant power, visibility, authority, the ability to hurl lightning and make dramatic pronouncements from on high. Poseidon wanted the seas, all that vast wet territory, all those storms and shipwrecks and islands waiting to be ruled. Nobody wanted the underworld. Nobody wanted to spend eternity underground surrounded by the dead, cut off from sunlight and life and the world above. So they drew lots. They literally drew straws to determine who would be sentenced to rule the realm of death. And Hades lost, or won, depending on how you look at it. He drew the underworld, and in that single moment of cosmic chance, his fate was sealed forever. Think about that for a moment. Your entire existence, your eternal purpose, your role in the fundamental structure of reality determined by drawing straws. No choice, no negotiation, just bad luck and the expectation that you'll accept it and do the job anyway. And Hades accepted it. He didn't throw a tantrum like Ares would have. He didn't plot revenge like Hera might have. He didn't try to weasel out of it through cunning like Zeus absolutely would have done if the roles were reversed. Hades looked at the lot he'd drawn, looked at his brothers celebrating their domains, looked down at the earth that he would have to descend beneath, and he went. He took his helm of invisibility, a gift from the Cyclopes during the war against the Titans, and he walked into the darkness. And he became the lord of the underworld, not because he wanted to, not because he was suited for it by nature or temperament or divine specialty, but because someone had to do it, and he was the one who drew the short straw. But here's where Hades' story starts to get interesting, where it stops being just another tale of divine duty and becomes something more complex. He was good at it, better than good. He was the most effective ruler in the entire pantheon, while Zeus was up on Olympus dealing with constant rebellions and affairs and political maneuvering, while Poseidon was throwing earthquakes and drowning sailors over petty slights. Hades was building a functioning government in the land of the dead. He established order where there had been chaos. He created structure, hierarchy, purpose. He didn't just warehouse souls in some grim eternal waiting room. He sorted them. He judged them. He gave each soul exactly what they deserved based on how they lived their lives. The virtuous went to the Elysian fields, a place of eternal peace and happiness. The wicked went to Tartarus, a prison of endless torment. The ordinary, the vast majority of humanity who were neither heroes nor monsters, went to the Asphodel Meadows, a place of quiet, neutral existence where they could wander and remember their lives without pain or pleasure overwhelming them. kingdom. Hades created the first true justice system, not the arbitrary, temperamental judgment of gods who played favorites and held grudges, but actual justice based on actions and consequences. He didn't punish people because they insulted him. He didn't reward people because they flattered him. He looked at how they lived and placed them accordingly. And he did this for every single soul that died, every day, for all of eternity. No vacations, no days off, no escape. The dead kept coming, an endless tide of humanity, and Hades received them all. Peasants and kings, heroes and cowards, the loved and the forgotten. They all came to him eventually, and he shepherded every single one with the same patient, implacable authority. That's not villainy. That's being the cosmic civil servant who keeps reality functioning while everyone else gets to have adventures and glory and myths written about their exploits. But let's talk about what made Hades different from his brothers, because the contrast is crucial to understanding why he became the scapegoat for death and suffering. Zeus ruled through power and fear. His authority came from the lightning bolt, from the threat of violence, from the constant reminder that he could destroy you if you disobeyed. Poseidon ruled through volatility and unpredictability. You obeyed him because you never knew when his temper would turn, when your ship would sink, when an earthquake would swallow your city. Hades ruled through inevitability. He didn't need to threaten. He didn't need to punish. He simply was. Every soul came to him eventually. Every life ended in his kingdom. You could defy Zeus and sometimes get away with it. You could appease Poseidon with sacrifices and prayers. But Hades? There was no negotiating with Hades. There was no escape. Death came for everyone, and when it did, you belonged to him. That's true power. Not the power of violence or fear, but the power of absolute certainty. And Hades wielded that power with extraordinary restraint. He almost never left the underworld. While other gods were constantly interfering in mortal affairs, starting wars, seducing humans, playing games with human lives, Hades stayed below. He did his job. He maintained his realm. He kept the dead dead and the living living, which sounds simple, but was actually the most important cosmic function in existence. Because if the boundary between life and death broke down, if the dead could return and the living could visit the underworld freely, then reality itself would collapse. Nothing would mean anything. Actions would have no consequences. Death would lose its weight, which means life would lose its value. Hades was the one god who understood this. He was the guardian of mortality, the keeper of the one law that even gods mostly respected. The dead stay dead. Mostly. Because there were exceptions, and the exceptions reveal everything about who Hades was. Orpheus, the legendary musician, came to the underworld to retrieve his wife Eurydice, who had died from a snake bite on their wedding day. He played his lyre and sang songs so beautiful, so achingly sad, that even the Furies wept. Even the damned in Tartarus paused in their torments to listen. And Hades, the stern lord of death, the god who never bent the rules, was moved. He agreed to let Eurydice return to life on one condition. Orpheus had to walk out of the underworld ahead of her, trusting that she followed, and he couldn't look back until they both reached the surface. If he looked back, she would return to death forever. It was a test of faith, of trust, of whether love could exist without the need for confirmation. Orpheus failed. He looked back, Eurydice returned to the underworld, and Hades kept his word exactly as he'd promised. Was that cruelty? Was that the act of a villain who enjoyed watching love fail? Or was it mercy, tinged with the harsh wisdom of someone who knows that death can't be reversed without consequences, that the rules exist for reasons, that even gods can't just undo death whenever someone asks nicely? Hades gave Orpheus a chance that literally no one else in all of Greek mythology received. He bent the absolute law of mortality, created a loophole, offered hope where hope shouldn't exist, and Orpheus couldn't hold up his end of the bargain. That's not Hades being cruel. That's Hades being more generous than he had any obligation to be, and reality reasserting itself when someone tried to cheat death. The same thing happened with Admetus, whose wife Alcestis volunteered to die in his place. Heracles came to the underworld and wrestled Thanatos, the personification of death itself, and won. Hades let Alcestis go because technically the rules had been followed. Someone died, someone else fought for them, the cosmic balance was maintained. Hades was firm, yes, unyielding, absolutely, but he wasn't unfair. He never punished anyone who didn't deserve it. He never broke his own rules. He was, in every sense that matters, just. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the story that most people know about Hades, the tale that's been used for centuries to paint him as a villain, the abduction of Persephone. Here's the version everyone knows. Hades saw Persephone, the beautiful daughter of Demeter, gathering flowers in a meadow. He desired her. He emerged from the underworld in his chariot, grabbed her, dragged her kicking and screaming down to his kingdom, and forced her to become his queen. Demeter, grief-stricken and furious, plunged the world into eternal winter until Zeus intervened and negotiated a compromise. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld with Hades and part of the year on Earth with her mother. That's why we have seasons. That's the myth. And it makes Hades look like a kidnapper and a rapist, the god who stole a young girl and condemned her to a prison marriage. But here's what that version leaves out, what the older versions of the myth make clear. Zeus approved it. Zeus, Persephone's father and Hades' brother, explicitly told Hades he could marry Persephone. In the ancient Greek understanding of marriage, fathers arranged unions for their daughters. Women didn't choose their husbands, their fathers did. And Zeus, as both king of gods and Persephone's father, had the authority to give her to Hades. So from Hades' perspective, he wasn't committing a crime, he was following proper procedure. He asked Zeus for permission to marry, Zeus said yes, Hades collected his bride. The fact that no one bothered to tell Persephone or ask her opinion about it, that's not specific to Hades. That was how marriage worked in ancient Greece. It was expected. It was normal. It was the same system that governed every marriage in the culture that created this myth. Does that make it right? Absolutely not. Does that excuse the trauma of being taken against your will? Not even remotely. But it does complicate the narrative of Hades as villain. He wasn't breaking rules or acting outside cultural norms. He was following them. The crime, if we're assigning blame, belongs to the system itself and to Zeus, who approved the marriage without consulting Demeter or Persephone. Hades was just doing what gods did, taking what had been promised to him. And here's the really interesting part that later myths explore. Persephone became queen of the underworld. Not prisoner, not victim, queen. She sat beside Hades on the throne. She had authority over the dead. She made decisions about who went where, which souls deserved mercy, which deserved punishment. She became, in every meaningful sense, Hades' equal partner in ruling the underworld. Some versions even suggest she came to love him, or at least respect him, because Hades, unlike Zeus, unlike most gods, was faithful. He never cheated on her, he never kept mistresses or seduced mortals, or created demigod children from affairs. There are only two minor exceptions in all of Greek mythology, both disputed, both early in their marriage, and neither as dramatic or consequential as Zeus's endless infidelities. Hades treated Persephone with a respect and fidelity that was almost unheard of in Greek mythology. And Persephone, perhaps recognizing that she could be queen of the underworld or an unmarried daughter living under her mother's control forever, perhaps seeing that Hades was actually offering her real power and autonomy in a world that gave women almost none, perhaps simply making the best of a situation she didn't choose, stayed. Part of the year she returned to the surface, brought spring with her, reunited with her mother. Part of the year she descended back to the underworld and ruled the dead alongside her husband. And that compromise, that division of time and duty and identity between two worlds, became the foundation of one of Greek mythology's most complex and surprisingly functional marriages. But let's return to Hades himself, because Persephone's story, as important as it is, often overshadows who Hades was as a god and a ruler. Here's what the Greeks believed about him. He was Pluton, the giver of wealth. Not Zeus, not Poseidon, but Hades, because everything valuable came from beneath the earth. Gold, silver, gems, minerals, all the resources that built civilizations emerged from his domain. Farmers prayed to him because crops grew from seeds planted in the earth, which was his territory. Miners made offerings before descending into caves and tunnels, entering the realm that belonged to the Lord of the Underworld. Hades was rich beyond measure, not from conquest or theft, but because his domain simply contained everything of value. And he was called Pluton, which eventually became Pluto in Roman mythology, because acknowledging his wealth was safer than speaking his actual name. The Greeks had a superstition: don't say Hades unless absolutely necessary. Don't invoke the god of the underworld casually. Don't draw his attention. So they called him Pluton, the wealthy one, the generous one, using euphemism and flattery to talk about death without naming it directly. This tells you everything about humanity's relationship with mortality. We fear it, we avoid it, we create comfortable euphemisms and talk around it and do everything possible to not confront the simple fact that we're all going to die and we're all going to end up in Hades' kingdom eventually. And Hades, understanding this, didn't demand worship in the way other gods did. He didn't need temples and festivals and elaborate rituals. He didn't need humans to love him or praise him or build monuments to his glory. He knew they would come to him when their time came. He knew he didn't need to advertise or compete for attention. Death was the only guaranteed outcome. Every other god had to work to maintain their followers, but Hades? Hades just had to wait. That's cosmic patience. That's the kind of long-view thinking that comes from ruling eternity. And yet, for all his patience and justice and faithfulness, Hades became synonymous with evil. When Christianity spread through the Mediterranean, when the church fathers needed a figure to represent Satan and hell, they looked at Greek mythology and chose Hades. Not Zeus, who threw lightning bolts and flooded the earth and committed countless atrocities. Not Ares, the god of war who bathed in blood and reveled in violence. Not any of the gods who actually embodied cruelty or chaos or destruction. They chose Hades, the god who never left his realm, the god who judged fairly, the god who kept his word, the god whose only crime was ruling the place where dead people go. And they transformed him from a stern but just administrator into a demonic figure, the king of hell, the punisher of souls, the enemy of all that's good and holy. It was a profound misunderstanding of what Hades represented, but it was also incredibly effective. For centuries, Hades was the villain. The underworld became hell, death became punishment, and the god who simply did his job, who maintained the natural order, who shepherded souls with patient authority, became the scapegoat for humanity's fear of mortality. But the ancient Greeks knew better. They understood that Hades wasn't evil, he was necessary. Death wasn't punishment, it was the natural end of life. The underworld wasn't hell, it was simply where you went when your story ended. And Hades wasn't a demon, he was the god who made sure that ended stories stayed ended, that the cosmic order held, that life and death remained separate and meaningful. They didn't love him. They feared him, yes, because death is frightening and the underworld is dark and no one wants to think too hard about their eventual fate. But they respected him. They honored him. They understood that without Hades, without that stern figure keeping the boundary between life and death intact, the entire cosmos would collapse into chaos. Zeus might have been king of the gods, but Hades was the foundation. He was the one doing the work that mattered, the unglamorous paternal labor that kept everyone else safe. There's a story, less famous than the abduction of Persephone, that reveals Hades' character perfectly. Theseus and Pirithous, two heroes drunk on their own legends, decided they wanted to marry daughters of Zeus. Theseus chose Helen, who was still a child at the time, and they kidnapped her. Then, Pirithous, not content with that crime, decided he wanted Persephone herself. They traveled to the underworld, sat down on chairs at Hades' table, and asked him to give him his wife. And Hades, instead of immediately destroying them for their arrogance, invited them to sit while they talked. The moment they sat, the chairs bound them. They became part of the furniture, trapped in the underworld forever, or at least until Heracles came and freed Theseus during one of his labors. Pirithous stayed behind, still stuck, still paying for his audacity and wanting to steal the queen of the dead. That's Hades in perfect miniature. He didn't rage, he didn't summon monsters, he didn't torture them with elaborate punishments. He just let them sit down and let the underworld itself handle the consequences of their choices. That's how he operated. Firm, patient, inevitable. You came to his realm planning to steal his wife? Fine, sit down. Stay a while. Stay forever. The punishment fit the crime perfectly. They wanted to take something that wasn't theirs, so they lost their own freedom instead. It's almost elegant in its simplicity. It's the kind of justice that doesn't require cruelty or anger or personal vendetta. It just requires understanding consequences and letting them play out naturally. Now, let's talk about what it actually meant to rule the underworld, because the scope of Hades' responsibility is almost impossible to comprehend. Every human who has ever died came under his authority. Millions, billions, an endless tide of souls, each with their own story, their own life, their own death, their own needs and questions and demands, and Hades had to manage all of it. He had helpers, yes, Charon, the ferryman who transported souls across the river Styx, Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guarded the gates, the Furies who punished the wicked, the judges who assessed each soul's life and determined their fate. But ultimately, the responsibility was his. The underworld was his domain. Every soul was his subject. And he couldn't fail, because failure meant the collapse of the boundary between life and death, meant the dead rising and the living descending, meant chaos and confusion and the end of meaning itself. That burden would break most gods. Zeus couldn't handle it. He needed constant validation and worship and dramatic demonstrations of power just to maintain his authority over a single realm. Poseidon couldn't handle it. He was too volatile, too prone to tantrums and revenge, too concerned with his own ego. But Hades? Hades carried that burden for eternity and never complained, never asked for recognition, never demanded praise or built monuments to his glory. He just did the work. Day after day, soul after soul, judgment after judgment, forever. That's not villainy. That's the opposite of villainy. That's being so committed to duty, so aligned with responsibility, so understanding of what needs to be done that you sacrifice everything else, your happiness, your freedom, your chance at glory, just to keep the cosmos functioning. And here's the final irony of Hades' story. He was probably the most stable, most well-adjusted god in the entire pantheon. He wasn't traumatized by his father eating him, at least no more than his siblings were. He wasn't consumed by bitterness about drawing the underworld. He didn't take out his frustrations on mortals or start wars or play games with human lives. He found purpose in duty. He found meaning in maintaining order. He found satisfaction in doing his job well, even if his job was thankless and invisible and would never earn him the kind of worship or fame that other gods received. He was, in the most fundamental sense, the adult, the responsible one, the god who understood that someone has to do the hard work, the unglamorous, eternal work of keeping civilization functioning, and he accepted that role without resentment or complaint. Think about what that means for us, for how we understand work and duty and purpose in our own lives. We live in a culture that celebrates glory, that worships fame, that tells us we should all be pursuing our passions and chasing our dreams and becoming legends. And there's value in that, absolutely. Dreams matter, passion matters, the pursuit of excellence matters. But so does the unglamorous work. The essential work, the work that no one celebrates but everyone depends on. The teachers who show up day after day to classrooms that don't appreciate them. The nurses who work endless shifts for inadequate pay. The social workers who carry impossible caseloads of human suffering. The janitors and maintenance workers and infrastructure specialists who keep modern civilization functioning while everyone else takes it for granted. These are the modern Hades, the people doing necessary work in the shadows, maintaining the systems that everyone else ignores until they break. And maybe that's what Hades' story teaches us ultimately, that there's dignity in essential work, that doing your job well, even when it's thankless, even when no one's watching, even when you'll never get credit for it, matters more than fame or glory or recognition. That justice and order and maintaining boundaries, boring as those things might be, are what separates civilization from chaos. That someone has to be the adult in the room, has to carry the weight, has to do what needs to be done regardless of whether it's appreciated. Hades was that someone for the cosmos, and he never wavered, never failed, never abandoned his post. He just stayed in the darkness, keeping the dead where they belonged, maintaining the barrier that made life meaningful because death was final. The Underworld still exists in Greek mythology, eternal and unchanging. The dead still arrive, the rivers still flow backward, Cerberus still guards the gate, and Hades still sits on his throne beside Persephone, judging souls, maintaining order, doing the work that has to be done. He's not a villain. He never was. He's the stern shepherd of the dead, the keeper of cosmic justice, the one God who understood that power without responsibility is chaos, that authority without fairness is tyranny, that ruling means serving, even when service is exhausting and eternal and completely thankless. He drew the short straw and got stuck with the worst job in existence, and he did it better than anyone else possibly could have. He kept his word. He maintained his realm. He never cheated, never lied, never broke the rules. He was, in every way that actually matters, the most honorable god in the Greek pantheon. And for that honor, that justice, that unwavering commitment to duty, he became the most misunderstood figure in all of Western mythology. So, the next time someone tells you Hades is evil, the next time you see him portrayed as a villain in movies or books or games, remember this. He's the god who does his job, who maintains the boundaries, who keeps the dead dead so the living can live, who judges fairly, who honors his commitments, who stays faithful, who carries an impossible burden with patient grace. That's not evil. That's not villainy. That's being the foundation that everyone else builds on while taking the credit. And maybe, just maybe, that makes Hades the most heroic figure in Greek mythology, the one who serves without recognition, who works without praise, who maintains order without demanding worship, the god of the underworld, the keeper of the dead, the one who drew the short straw and spent eternity proving that sometimes losing the lottery is how you win at life, or death, or whatever existence means when you rule eternity from a throne in darkness, doing the work that no one else wanted but everyone needed, forever.